Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little, and I'm here today with the 72nd episode of Weekly Poker Hand. That is a lot of episodes, and I want to thank all of you who have been here since the beginning or who are just starting to listen to this podcast. If you want to see the video of this podcast each week instead of only the audio, if you are listening on iTunes or Stitcher, you can go to jonathanlittlepoker.com and click on the podcast tab, and you can see videos of all of these hands. Today's episode is brought to you by my huge book project, Excelling at No Limit Hold'em. You can actually get a 16-page PDF extract for free at hold'embook.com. So go there and check that out. I am really excited about the book. Everyone is loving it, and I am proud to be the author. So today's hand is from a 10,000 euro buy-in European Poker Tour event. So let's go ahead and get to it. We have 45,000 chips at 100, 200 with a 25 ante. And these tournaments usually start with 50,000, I believe. So I probably chipped down just a little bit, but that certainly does not matter early in a tournament. Folds around to a good French guy and the cutoff, who has 50,000, who raises to 500. The button, tight aggressive French guy. I must have been in France at this time. I think this was actually from Deauville, so about 5 months ago. Tight aggressive French kid calls the button. European guy folds small blind, and I decide to call 300 more in the big blind with 8 of clubs, 6 of spades. So 8-6 offsuit is certainly not a good hand, but whenever you are a very deep stack, I don't really have a problem with calling with a somewhat wide range, especially if you know that you can check raise various flops and put your opponents in tough situations. So I like this. I think this is a fine call. You could also 3-bet if you felt like bluffing, but it's good to mix it up. You could also fold, of course, but I tend to take flops whenever it's really cheap. Whenever there's an ante in play and you're facing a smallish raise with deep stacks, I'll see a flop. So we get a good flop, 6-6-2 rainbow. I like to check. I don't really think leading out has much merit at all. I think if I lead, my opponents are going to play relatively well. They're going to call with all their overpairs, which would have bet anyway. And maybe they call one time with stuff like ace high and king queen and whatnot, but I think they fold that to a turn bet pretty much every time. So I really don't like leading in this spot. It's tough to lead whenever your opponents just cannot have much. And I think this is a really good example of a spot where my opponents just cannot have very much. So I check. Cutoff French guy bets 600 into the 1800 pot. Probably doesn't mean much. Tight aggressive French kid calls on the button. So it goes bet call. So at this point I have to assume one or both of my opponents have something. The button just simply must have something in order to call a bet, although the cutoff did bet fairly small, so perhaps he doesn't have to have too strong of a hand. I do think I need to raise at this point. I think if I call, my hand looks a lot like either a marginal draw, like 5-4, or a really good slow-played hand, like a 6. And with that range in general, I think I want to be check-raising to put my opponents in horrible spots with all of their non-6 hands. Imagine if I am check raising with 5-4, my opponent has something like pocket 7s, he's just going to be sick and he's going to fold most of the time. So I like check raising here with my bluffs, and I also think against good players, you also want to be doing that with your nut hands. And I think in general, I want to be playing a big pot with this hand. This hand's certainly good enough to play. I don't know if I'm trying to get all of the money in. Like if I raise and then someone re-raises, I'm just going to call and play it slow. But my hand is almost certainly best. 8-6 on 6-6-2 is very good. So I do like to check raise. I make it 2,100. So not a huge raise, 3.5 times my opponent's bet, but in proportion to the pot, it's actually a fairly small bet. The way you figure out how much a pot size raise or bet would be is you look at the last bet, which was 600, then you look at any other additional money that's in the pot. So you do 3 times the last bet, which would be 1,800, plus any dead money. So 1,800 plus 1,800 plus the 600 of the the bet and or call, however you want to look at it. So that would be about a 4,200 chip check raise. So I actually make it fairly small in proportion to the pot, but I don't think that matters too much. This is a spot where I do want to make this sizing because I am trying to get action the majority of the time I check raise, I think. So as expected, cutoff folds, and then much to my surprise, the tight aggressive French kid on the button makes it 6,000. So to recap, cutoff bet 600, button called, I make it 2,100, button makes it 6,000. It's a pretty horrible spot with trips. I really do not know what the best play is at this point. I don't really understand why the tight aggressive French kid would raise here with a 6, because if he has a 6, it should be really hard for me to have a 6. he can't expect me to just blast my stack in either. I mean, he has to think I'm going to bet if I have a 6 or a draw on the turn. So this doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I'm not really buying it. But at the same time, I can't just shove all in or anything like that. So I call. I can't shove all in. I guess I want to make this clear. I can't shove all in because if my opponent calls, I actually am just beat. It means he just played his hand fast. And I don't want to re-raise either because if I re-raise, it looks incredibly strong. So it turns a 9, board still rainbow. I'm just going to check, call at this point pretty much every time. So I do check. Opponent bets 7,000 into the 14,000 pot. I mean, at this point, it's getting very dicey. I'm certainly unhappy about this scenario. But I don't think I'm really trying to fold, especially against people who are perceived to be reasonably good. You really don't want to be folding too often. The problem here is that my hand looks a lot like a 6. And when your hand looks a lot like a 6 and your opponent's still betting, you should strongly consider getting out of the way. So I would not fault myself for folding here on the turn. I think it would actually be reasonable. But I'm just not folding. River's a king. I'm going to check for sure. And luckily, opponent checks behind. If the opponent put me all in on the river, I have no clue what I would have done. I would have been incredibly unhappy. He could have bet 35,000 into the 28,000 pot. I mean, I guess I should probably fold, but knowing me, I'd probably just snap him off and not worry about it. My opponent did muck, though. Whenever it goes check on the river, I have to show my hand first. The way it works is if it goes check on the river, the person out of position has to show his hand first. I showed my hand, my opponent mucked. So clearly he decided to bluff with a hand like 5-4 if I had to guess. Or maybe just had a vastly overplayed hand like pocket queens, but I think that would be a pretty horrible play. I really can't come up with very many hands that he has because I'm chopping with all the 6s, right? Whenever the board runs out, 6-6-2, 9, king, we all have 6-6-6, king, 9. So I don't know what was happening here. My opponent was clearly bluffing. I don't think it's a good spot to bluff, but sometimes it happens. If you guys want more fun information about how to play poker, definitely check out hold'embook.com. There are some excellent chapters by world-class multi-table tournament players. Some of my favorites were the chapter by Alex Fitzgerald, Assassinato Online. He goes really deep on how he has crushed online tournaments for a long time. Also, 2 other great chapters by Scott Clements and Matt Affleck go through all the things that they do on a regular basis that has allowed them to win in the live poker arena for a very long time. So check out the book. You can get a free 16-page PDF extract at hold'embook.com. Thank you all very much for watching and listening. I will talk to you next week.